Hey, everybody. Welcome to Away Games, a Chicago Cubs podcast. We are two comedians talking about the Chicago Cubs, and this week's both exciting and sad, I guess. But it's two comedians talking about the Cubs, and this is a very away version of Away Games. My name is Kevin McCaffrey, and here's Adam Mamawala.
Hello.
What's up, man?
How are you?
I'm all right. We had, I think you and I had a very trying week of Chicago baseball.
We did. It was fun, but it would have been more fun if the Cubs had not lost all the games that we went to.
Really, the key word there is all. I guess lost is also the two key words are lost and all. If it had been a 1-2 series in some way, it would have been we would have been able to shrug it off a little bit. But yeah, Adam and I went to St. Louis this week, and neither of us had ever been to that stadium before. And we were joined by Ken Schultz, who's also had a hell of a week. He was with us all 3 of those days, and he just got shit talked by Martina Navratilova on Twitter. So he's having a
whoa.
Yeah, she called out.
Wow, that's amazing.
She called him out, so that's pretty good. So follow @KenSchultz_ for some of the best baseball and Cubs writing you're going to see, and for a man who's shit talked by an icon who has problematic opinions about trans athletes. So
that's a sentence I did not expect to be on this podcast.
No, man, it's been a big, weird week. But you and I drove across country. We drove from New York out to St. Louis. What are your? I don't know. I guess do you want to start with just your takeaways of St. Louis and the stadium, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had told me that at the end of our Cubs road trip, all we had seen was a Brewers victory, I don't think I would have been pumped about that.
Yeah, I forgot that.
We stopped in Pittsburgh and saw a Brewers-Pirates game that the Brewers won. I mean, overall impressions of St. Louis, fine. I mean, like, I think the whole, like, St. Louis is boring narrative is getting, like, it's like reaching the end of where I'm not annoyed by it anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, not even in a jokey way, but I'm sort of bored by it at this point,
Yeah, no, it's a perfect way to say it. It's like, it was such an innocuous thing in the first place that took on this whole life that it's like, okay, we've had the series where KB was at St. Louis for the first time. Let's just all relax.
Yeah. It would have been nice if KB had a better series specifically.
It would have, yeah. I tend to think that he'll be just fine, as was the case earlier this year. But, I mean, I thought the stadium was really nice.
It was a pretty solid stadium. Getting in was a hellscape. I was impressed by how bad it was to get in on Sunday. I don't think I've ever waited longer in a security line than I did there, which is weird because it's not like an old stadium.
It is weird. Yeah.
But besides that, it was, fairly solid stadium. Good. The skyline is cool. It's set up well.
Yeah, it's cool to be able to see the arch behind the field. The stadium is, it's nice. The concourses are big. There's good food options. And honestly, for the most part, I didn't feel like there was a lot of animosity. Like, if anything, it was a little more like kind of joking sort of stuff than I imagine it would have been when the Cubs were terrible.
Right. Yeah, it was, I would say, as far as how assholey the fans were, the opposing fans, and you and I have both been to a bunch of opposing stadiums, definitely not one of the worst, which is kind of surprising when your team gets beat 3 in a row and it's the biggest rivalry for them. But yeah, I felt like the St. Louis fans that we came across seemed to be pretty decent.
Yeah, I mean, with few exceptions, there wasn't really any specific incident I can think of. I feel like I've gotten more shit at Mets games than I did in St. Louis, for sure.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I've had much worse Mets fans to deal with. Mets fans might be the biggest dipshits as far as that I've dealt with as an opposing team fan. Also, and part of it's just living in New York, that like some of the best baseball fans I know are Mets fans too. So it's a weird combination of high-end good Mets fans and really low-end bad Mets fans.
As I was mentioning, I remember specifically back in the day wearing a Fukudome jersey to Shea Stadium and having people just repeatedly yell, "Fuck you, dummy," which in some ways I guess I was asking for it, but in other ways, come on.
Yeah, I would say you personally weren't asking for it too much. But yeah, anyway, that's a decent decent overall review of the St. Louis experience, I guess. But man, you could hardly script a more frustrating 3-game series to see than watching the Cubs lose in 10 innings when Yu Darvish knocks in the only run.
Right.
But
my personal 11-game winning streak ended on a walk-off by the Cardinals, so it's going to end.
Yeah. R.I.P. your winning streak. That was a hell of a run you had, and then boy did it end hard. It's I don't know if we can count the because we weren't. So game 2 it was tied, and then there was a giant storm for 3.5 hours, and then they started the game super late again. So I don't even know if I'm counting that as a loss for you.
Right. Yeah. I guess it's a tie.
Yeah, you left when it was tied. It
should have been suspended. Right.
Yes, exactly. And then
you only saw them lose once, so that's good.
Yeah, because I had to leave early on Sunday, which ended up being. I was listening on the radio, but that hard to have a more frustrating loss than that too. The Cubs just can't get anything going against Adam Wainwright, who threw I think 340 pitches in that game. And still couldn't get anything going.
I think Dusty Baker was guest managing for the Cardinals.
That would have been the only way to make it more maddening, is if they literally called in Dusty Baker to beat the Cubs in front of us. Yeah, that was super. And when both runs scored in such stupid ways on Sunday, Wilson overthrowing second and then scoring on a sack fly, and then the pickoff, a failed pickoff was, real.
Right. And I mean, you can't assume that the Cubs would have scored that run in the 9th without that, because obviously then the infield's in and who knows. But to lose when Hamels was dominating and really neither run that the Cubs gave up should have come across is very frustrating. And it's also frustrating that, like, I think it just is bad managing by Schilt to leave Wainwright out that long. And the fact that he got proven right by a crazy good Colton Wong catch. Like, I kept saying to Ken when we were there, like, if I'm a Cardinals fan right now, I am going ballistic saying, why is Wainwright still in this game? Like, it was similar to when Madden sent Darvish out for the 8th inning a couple weeks ago, and everyone was like, this doesn't make, why are we doing this?
Right. Yeah.
And when it actually works for the manager, it's all the more frustrating.
Absolutely. And especially Wainwright, I guess, pitched great, but he doesn't have like big stuff anymore. It felt like an old Cubs team getting beat by someone who doesn't even seem to have it anymore.
Well, that was a weird thing. I mean, he pitched 8 scoreless innings and and gave up 7 walks, which I think was the first time someone had done that in like 10 years.
That's an AJ Burnett's ass stat line,
right?
From back in the day, yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. It's the Cubs' problems right now offensively are very reminiscent of what happened towards the end of last year, where they just cannot get a hit with anybody in scoring position, to the point where it's like almost an impossibly bad streak.
It seems to be impossibly bad, except they've been worse than almost everybody at it for 3 years in a row.
Right.
Now. And they are the worst team compared with how they hit without runners in scoring position. When comparing how they hit without runners in scoring position to how they hit with runners in scoring position, they are the worst team in baseball again. And that, I don't know what to do about that. We've had 3 different hitting coaches in the last 3 years. These guys are guys who can hit. Kyle Schwarber, who has been overall, I think, pretty decent in the leadoff spot with a slump through most of that St. Louis series, but good on either side of it. Just insanely can't hit with runners in scoring position, or hasn't to historic levels. Is crazy. It's very frustrating.
And I mean, yesterday looked a lot better. We're recording this Tuesday, as we usually do, and the Cubs played a really nice game yesterday against the Angels and did some hitting with runners in scoring position. So that's a step in the right direction. Right. And speaking of, like, how annoying it was for both teams to wait out a 3.5 hour rain delay on Saturday, I feel bad for the Angels because they scheduled this in such a way that I want to say they were going from like Seattle to LA and had to then go to Chicago just for the day to then go back west.
God, that's like how I schedule trips. That's basically exactly. That sucks. Yeah. And speaking of scheduling trips, the final beat for the St. Louis weekend. As we arrived at the stadium, my car fell completely apart. So Adam and I drove from New York to St. Louis and literally just started hearing something scraping as we were in also the worst traffic I've ever seen for a parking situation. And then we get out and the whole front of my car was like on the ground. And it was just a perfect representation of what was to come, I guess.
Right.
And it ended up getting fixed. A guy from AAA came and tied my car together literally with a cell phone charger cable. So
when you say a guy from AAA, are you referring to the Iowa Cubs?
Yes, I am.
Randy
Yes,
Rosario came and fixed your car?
I mean, that would be a classic Randy Rosario move, honestly, showing up to help us out when we need it most, just coincidentally. Yeah, Rosario, I believe the crafty left-hander would be crafty with a cell phone cable. I believe that. But on the bright side, we did meet another Cubs podcast host. We hung out at Kilroy's, I believe, after game one with Andy, who is at Briz_Blue, BRYZ_Blue, and she and our friend Sarah Sanchez do the Cup of Cubby Blue podcast, which is pretty new together. And it was very fun hanging out with her. So that was a bright side of St. Louis.
Yeah, even though her husband is a Cardinals fan, but we will forgive him that. And it just shows that true love is possible.
Absolutely. It's really, yes, it is very encouraging overall. And yeah, he's a good dude. But yeah, so I guess that's pretty much St. Louis weekend, right?
Yeah, and I feel like not to be a dick, but I feel like I did it. You know what I mean? Like I can't imagine a time where I would be like, I have to go back to St. Louis.
Right. I also feel like I did
it. I went up in the Arch. I ate some barbecue, saw some Cardinals games, and I feel like that's about what there is to do.
I think that is a pleasant and realistic summation.
To be clear, I am sick of the KB boring trope. I also believe that St. Louis is boring.
I think totally fair. Right. I think I'm generally not big on ranking cities in totality because there's so many different parts that go into, whatever, in so many neighborhoods that you can't check out in a couple of days. But yeah, as far as cities go, planted straight in the middle toward the maybe lightly beneath that, I would say, as far as just a weekend hang goes. So yeah.
I don't think I even mentioned to you that as Ken and I were walking to his car to escape the thunderstorm, a man, probably intoxicated, in a Chris Bryant jersey, decided to run across 4 lanes of traffic as they were getting a green light, and we almost saw this man explode. Like, he was very, very close to getting absolutely annihilated by a car, and is very lucky that the person was paying attention because they had a green light. And I just was wondering if he had been struck wearing the Chris Bryant jersey on this weekend, is that a hate crime, or how does that get classified?
Well, I think in St. Louis they don't have those, but
oh, right, that's true. But, well, he was a white guy, so in that case they maybe would have.
Okay, maybe, yeah. Yeah, that is a good question. It would have been, I'm glad that you didn't see a death in front of you, but boy, that would have been a perfect cartoonish metaphor for this weekend. It's just a Chris Bryant jersey being flattened in the middle of a boring street. Yeah. Well, there were some fun things that happened this week. The Cubs made a signing that I think you and I are both into, right?
Yeah, I'm very into the. We're talking, of course, about CarGo, Carlos Gonzalez, who, if you look at his numbers, and I was just looking at them, they're not particularly sexy over the past few years. You're seeing pretty consistent regression, but also he's not that old. He's 33. And,
yeah, he's just a guy who's been around forever.
He's been around forever. I think he his best season was his age 24 season, and that was in 2010. But he's been around a long time. He's been up since 2008. Actually came up with Oakland, which I had not remembered. And then obviously spent most of his career in Colorado. But, if you look at it, basically starting in 2016 and then into 17, 18, and this year, his numbers have gone down pretty consistently. But I do think, and other people have made this comparison, this could be a very like Jim Edmonds 2008 type signing, where it's kind of a high upside guy who has a solid pedigree, certainly a professional hitter and a very good fielder, and could be rejuvenated by playing in a place like Chicago in a pennant race. And said as much after the game. I don't know if you watched any of the game yesterday, but first of all, I like him a lot. Like, he seems like a really cool dude, and I've only heard good things about him as a teammate, which is also helpful, especially with Zobrist not being around right now.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, he said as much, which was like, it was just awesome to play in this environment. And Len and JD were mentioning that he has done some damage against the Cubs. He hit for the cycle at Wrigley at one point, and then had a 5-for-5 on another trip there. But he was saying, it's awesome to be on this side of it, wearing the white jersey and getting love from the fans. He made an unbelievable catch in the
crazy.
gap. Yeah,
and he's
saved probably 3 runs.
Yeah, saved probably three runs, and he's a 3-time Gold Glove winner too, which is the thing. I think you think of CarGo as a opposing team's fan, you're like, oh yeah, he was a big hitter for a long time, and obviously some of that inflated by Colorado numbers, but you think of him as a hitter, but he won 3 Gold Gloves, and geez Louise, that was a hell of a catch, going skidding towards the base of that brick wall over the shoulder, that was
frankly
awesome.
a frightening catch to make, especially when he's not that familiar with that. I mean, you can break your neck doing that.
Oh, absolutely. And you could see Hayward almost went to like grab him to stop the skid,
right.
Which was cool. And I did see Carlos Gonzalez also said that he told the Cubs, his teammates that he feels like this is his second time on the Cubs because he was on the 2016 All-Star team that he in his words, he said was all Cubs. So
that's funny.
Yes, he's like, this is his second time on the team.
Well, and that's a good point as well, is that he was an all-star in 2016, and yes, that's 3 years ago, but he hit 25 home runs, had 100 RBIs, hit almost 300, OPS 855. So like, he's not that far removed from that kind of season, and I certainly don't expect those sorts of numbers, but for the risk that they're putting out there, which is minimal,
minor league contract.
Yeah, I think it's a great signing.
Yeah, and I think hopefully Ben Zobrist comes back someday, this year. But I think sort of looking at using CarGo as you used Zobrist, even though Carlos Gonzalez is a whole 5 years younger than Ben Zobrist. As we said, he's 33, which is surprisingly young, kind of. But if he's used basically in favorable matchups, like the Cubs are planning on using Zobrist, not an everyday guy necessarily, but a guy who gets a good amount of playing time in favorable matchups. It could be, a big time guy who does a good amount of important damage. Also, a guy who's not going to be scared of the playoffs and stuff. He's been a high end player for most of his career. And as you had the Jim Edmonds comparison, I also think a Cole Hamels comparison makes sense because Hamels was a guy who another high pedigree guy. He's older. I think he's older than CarGo, and he came over to the Cubs last year in a situation that mattered and sort of turned back the clock a little bit,
Yep.
And so it could be a little bit of a Hamels situation too. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are more things that the Cubs need to do to improve themselves. But anybody who is like shitting on this signing, I really don't understand the rationale behind that.
It's just, it seems weirdly obvious. I didn't even see that CarGo was released by or put on waivers by the Indians, which is crazy. It doesn't make any sense because the Indians have a AA outfield. So it's weird. But it seems like, why wouldn't you try this? Because you can just waive him,
Yeah,
it's no money.
Did other teams try to get him?
I don't know, but I guess no team that had a worse record than the Cubs did, which is most of them, So it's strange it happened, but good on the front office for taking that flyer.
Yeah. And so before we get into draft talk, which I know you had some info about, basically over the past week since we spoke to you last, obviously you had the crappy weekend in St. Louis, but it was bookended by victories on both sides. The one we've alluded to against the Angels yesterday, which it was very good to see Lester get back to looking as sharp as we expect him to look.
Totally.
After struggling a bit. And then the Wednesday game was the one that the Cubs won in Houston, the 2-1 victory. Hendricks pitched an absolute gem. And unfortunately, the big incident in that game was Almora hitting that foul ball that struck a child. They haven't really updated it a lot. I've been looking, and Almora has said, the family wants to maintain privacy. So, that's basically all we have is that, nobody is dead, thank God. But it could be. I feel like if they're being that private about it, it's probably not great.
Right. And I feel like I had heard vague things about, there was a report on the game thread on Reddit where people sitting around there had gotten good reports from the security guard nearby, and that apparently when the scene where when Almora kind of broke down and hugged the security guard was supposed, according to the people who were around that scene happening, said it was because he got good news. But as you say, the good news might just be not dead. I mean, that could have been it. Like, she's up and responsive, but yeah, it is kind of weird to not. You would think. I understand privacy, I guess, but you would think, hey, she's okay. Wouldn't be giving away that much. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
obviously, this this spurred the whole Twitter debate of should we extend the netting, and people freaking out and saying, well, people shouldn't be on their phones and they should bring a glove to the game, or don't let your kids sit behind. Like, what is your take on all of that?
I think while I understand you definitely should, if you're taking kids to a game, you should be aware of where you're sitting. You should be aware of, that some areas carry more risk than others. But as someone who's almost been killed by a home run ball in the outfield and who played baseball for a long time in my life, most of the seats can be kind of dangerous. Also, there are players on the field that don't hold their focus for the whole game. So it's unrealistic to think that literally everyone in the crowd is going to be completely locked in for 3.5 hours.
I just think like a subtle jab at Starlin Castro.
No, I'm no Bob Brenly, but yeah, but that name did run through my head as far as people who have been, known to possibly tune out occasionally. But also Manny Ramirez, I think, was a big tuner outer too. But to me, I think it's just a really weird place to plant your flag in the ground to be like, there shall be no more safety measures. There will be nothing. It seems like a weird commitment, because it's arbitrary. You're saying there already are nets to a point. So you're saying there is a magical distance of net that is okay, but doesn't infringe upon the rights of people in specific seats to see without netting. I don't understand that. I think putting the nets to the end of the dugouts makes all the sense in the world.
Well, they already are to the end of the dugouts at a lot of places. Would you be in favor of extending them like between the foul poles?
I mean, I haven't really thought about specifically the distance that it should go, but I don't know if all the way to the foul pole, but further, I would say. Or even honestly, it wouldn't have to be netting all the way up. A lower net that goes further out would be fine with me too, where it's taking away the Almoras, the extreme hard line drives, because those are only going so high, really, down those lines. How about you? What do you think?
Well, I think I totally agree. I think that people who are so vehemently opposed to it, it's like they've already extended the netting and people adjusted and it's fine. And I've sat behind home plate before, and you notice the net for like 10 minutes, and then you just get used to what you're not watching it through a chain link fence. I don't understand why people are so resistant to it. And the whole don't be on your phones and know where you're sitting with your kids. Sure, I agree to an extent, but that's not. You and I are the kinds of people that sure, we're on our phone some of the time, but we're more locked into the game than 98% of people at a game.
Right.
And I can't tell you that I could protect myself from 115-mile-an-hour baseball from that distance.
No, I mean, people can't. I think if you're because you're not major leaguers, and sometimes major leaguers can't, so it's, I don't know. I mean, I don't think you need to put the field in a plastic bubble, but this is, an analogy that will, that is a whole other can of worms. But to me, saying no, there shall not be another inch of netting, it's a little similar to people who are there shouldn't be one more bit of gun control anywhere. Even if you believe in gun ownership and all that stuff, fine. But you're telling me there's literally no possibility for slightly better anything. We're perfect.
It's not a bad comparison, even to not be political about it, in that baseball is an old sport that is very slavish to old rules and mores that do not take into account how much the game has changed.
Yeah, the game in the world. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, yeah, totally in favor of extending the netting, in a way that makes sense, obviously. But it's like, it really does feel like it's going to take a child dying for baseball to be like, you know what? We should have probably done something.
That's what happened with base coaches wearing helmets. It took a guy getting killed,
And the same thing in hockey. There was a girl who was killed at I think a Blue Jackets game. Yep. And it wasn't until that point that they finally extended the netting.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, man. So hopefully she's all right. It seems like it's not worst case scenario yet, and I think it was nice to see that Almora's teammates come together and try to take care of him too, when he was so clearly shaken.
Yeah, that was. I mean, there was a moment that they captured where the ESPN cameras, not to shit on ESPN, because I'm sure this is just kind of how TV is. It's kind of predatory sometimes, and there's like that certain tragedy porn that I feel like takes over. But Schwarber at one point clearly stood in front of Almora when he was really distraught in the dugout in such a way that it was blocking where the cameraman was trying to focus, which I think speaks to Schwarber. And also any player, even Will Clark, would probably feel bad.
Notorious piece of shit.
Notorious asshole Will Clark. Any player would feel horrible hitting anyone in the crowd, let alone a child. But I think the reaction that Almora had really speaks to the kind of person that he is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, fingers crossed for her. Cool. Should I get into draft talk?
Yeah, go for it.
So we've got one thing that's happening this week is the MLB draft, and it is not, it's not like the NBA or the NFL draft. There's a level for where I understand it doesn't get the mainstream coverage or excitement because unlike those other sports, you don't draft a guy who's going to be starting on your team next year. You know what I mean? These guys aren't coming up immediately. Baseball's a longer developmental process. Also, in many cases, drafting high schoolers who, you hope to see in 5 years. So what the Cubs are doing, it's at the time of this recording, we've seen 5 picks from the Cubs, and if you would like to follow what's happening with these draft picks and write-ups on them, scouting reports, follow our friend Brian Smith at Cub Prospects. He's doing a good job over there. But the first pick was a guy named Ryan Jensen, who Keith Law said was the hardest throwing starter in the draft.
Okay.
So that's exciting. A lot of people thought it was a reach in terms of where he was projected to go. This is a guy, so he's out of Fresno State. He throws basically 95 to 99 as a starter, right-hander. He is smallish for a starter. He's 6 foot, and that might be generous. But when you're looking at the profile of the stuff here and just what he looks like physically, it's a little Dylan Cease-esque, who was the guy that the Cubs drafted and then dealt in the Quintana trade, who now is one of the best pitching prospects in baseball. So that's the first pick, and it looks like they're probably hoping to go under slot with the signing there and save a little money for later in the rounds. But through 5 picks, the Cubs haven't made a pick that's a very obvious this is going to take a lot of money to get this guy. So we're still kind of waiting on the sexy surprise pick that they would have been saving money for here.
Right.
Pick 2, second round, is a guy named Chase Strumpf. And he is a UCLA second baseman, takes walks, strikes out a lot. He had kind of a down year this year, but his sophomore year, he hit 363 with a 475 OBP and was a preseason All-America for one of the top programs in the country. Fun fact, he got drafted by the Cubs and 1 minute later hit a home run in the playoffs. So
that's pretty cool.
That was pretty cool. My favorite pick so far is the 3rd round pick, a guy named Michael McAveen. He's the Louisville closer. Louisville's also a top end program, and this guy tops out at 100. So that's sexy. A closer who can throw 100. The Cubs system has been lacking a lot of power from hitters and from pitchers. We don't. I'm trying to think who's the last really hard throwing Cub prospect. Dylan Maples, I guess.
I guess so. How hard does he throw his fastball, Maples?
He gets up to 99, but he can't really,
And before that, I don't know, Kyle Farnsworth. It seems like no one.
Yeah.
forever.
Well, this McAfee might have a little Farnsworth in him because his last game he got ejected for saying that's horrible when after the umpire made a call. The umpire was incredibly sensitive. He didn't like scream it or anything. He literally just said that's horrible on the mound and then went back for the next pitch, and the umpire threw him out while his back was turned.
Oh my God.
But this is it's cool to see the Cubs taking some hard throwing, high end, guys who could have some ceiling there.
And speaking of bad umpiring and Dylan Maples, shout out to Las Diaz for blowing 2 strike calls in the 9th inning. Or 10th inning on Friday.
Incredibly bad. Yeah, good call. That was a very frustrating way to end that game.
Yeah, and maybe they lose anyway, but to lose as a result of that or that being part of it is super frustrating.
If you don't have eyes that can track good stuff, Dylan Maples has an incredibly hard-breaking slider. It's one of the it moves as much as almost any pitch from anybody in the game. But if you as an umpire can't catch up to it with your eyes, to call back a famous Danny DeVito tweet, Las Diaz retire, bitch. You are done. You get out. Las Diaz sucks ass. And if you want to hear about umpires sucking ass, Sarah Sanchez wrote a great piece that used a lot of stats about how bad so many of the umpires we know most are. It also had the top 10 umpires, which are names you don't know. And then finally, the last 2 picks the Cubs had so far, 4th and 5th round. Chris Clark, a 6'7" reliever, 92 to 95 with a big curve out of Southern Cal. He was in the 4th round. And then a guy named Josh Bergman out of University of Washington, control guy, low 90s. And the 2 of these 5 guys have already had Tommy John surgery. So it's not like a super sexy start, but I think those first 3 rounds are cool picks,
Mm-hmm.
And pitching heavy once again.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll see who they draft afterwards, and maybe they'll use some of that money that they've saved. That would be nice.
Yeah, it would be nice to see.
Unless they're saving it for Kimbrel.
Hey, then friggin' do that. That is a draft-related news thing. So now that the draft is gone, the Cubs could theoretically sign one of the best closers of all time for just money, and they wouldn't even give up a draft pick for it. So
right. And as you mentioned, and I forget if we talked about this on the pod last week, but there was that Athletic article about how the situation with Zobrist could allow the Cubs to have more money to go after Kimbrel. But it's kind of contingent upon Zobrist not returning. So I imagine that would force the Cubs into having some very awkward conversations like, hey, man, hope everything's going as well as it could be. Just wanted to check in and see see where you're at, because we were thinking of signing Craig Kimbrel. And anyway, thanks for winning us that World Series. But, let us know what's up.
That's funny, and I think the perfect tone. It's like when
hey man, yeah.
Hey man, it's like when your friend had like a really bad drunk night, and then it's kind of been ghosting you for a few days, and just like, so Ben, just checking in. We do have plans this weekend. Are you still gonna, be showing up to the wedding this weekend? Or hope everything's cool, buddy. Yeah.
Right.
I think that's all I got.
That's pretty much it. So we've got starting tonight, we got 3 games. We've got a little homestand here, 3 against Colorado, 3 against St. Louis, right back at them, and then a kind of home and home sort of deal with a series in between where the Cubs will go to Colorado on Monday. So we can do a prediction or not, but what are you looking at this week, at least with this homestand?
I kind of feel like let's be over 500 and I'll be happy right now. It's been kind of a bummer of a run. Also, Colorado's been super hot. They've won 9 of their last 10 to get back into second place, which is probably where they should be in the West. Honestly, just but they could be due for a come down, I guess, too. If the Cubs go, 4-3 over the next 7, I'll be pretty happy.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm hoping that because the stretch the Cubs are just coming out of to end that road trip was a 2-8 stretch, which is worse than their 2-7 start that led into opening day. So I'm hoping that this can be kind of a second version of that. Like, hey, cool, we're back home now.
Right.
Also, 1-5 on a road trip sucks, but the Astros are very good, and the Cardinals are better than they have played in May, and you're playing in St. Louis.
Right. The Astros are arguably the best. So 1 out of 3 over there was fine. You should have taken 1 or 2 at St. Louis, but yeah.
Well, that's the thing. In the division, sweeps kill you because I mean that sweep just wiped out what the Cubs accomplished by sweeping them in early May. It's such a huge difference. That's how divisional play in baseball works. Is that like if you just salvage one of the 3, you're only losing 1 game rather than 3 in the standings.
Yeah.
And you and I talked about this. Yeah, you and I talked about this on the way to St. Louis about how like this was a chance for the Cubs to really kind of step on the Cardinals' throats, albeit early in the season.
Yeah.
But the other opportunity was for the Cardinals to really get themselves right back in the thick of the Central, which is exactly what they did.
Yeah, the Cubs tried to step on their throat, missed, and then fell down a flight of stairs, and that is too bad. But yeah,
it is too bad. So yeah, I think you'd love to see the Cubs have already won one of this homestand. If they can take 2 of 3 from Colorado and certainly not get swept by St. Louis. Obviously, 2 of 3 would be great. You'll take anything better than that.
Right.
Just not getting swept is important, I think. But yeah, hell, I mean, we've already got one win bank. Let's win 4 of the next 6 and go 5-2 on this homestand before we go to Colorado, which is never an easy place to play. And with the Cubs bullpen still having some problems, also
Jesus.
A little scary.
Yeah, good call. That's going to might be a lot of innings for Montgomery and Chatwood that series. Yeah. Cool, man. Follow us at Away Games Pod on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us there. And any other business before we wrap this bad boy up?
No, I don't think so. Let's get back in first place.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for listening, everybody.